We have to finish the quest in Stonehaven.
Stan? Stan?
Hang on, guys. My dad wants something.
Stan!
What?
You've been on your computer all weekend. Shouldn't you go out and socialize with your friends?
I am socializing, Artard. I'm logged on to an MMORPG with people from all over the world and getting XP with my party using TeamSpeak.
I'm not a artard.
Okay, I'm still at Schweitzer, hoping that it doesn't start snowing on me. And now you can see the lake behind me, the lake called Pondere, which they call around here Pondere. Right, it's Pondere. All right, that's the best I can do in French. Why does anybody play a game? Why do little kids play games? They play games in order to simulate reality and to learn about reality. And so games can be very fanciful or games can be very realistic, but in all cases games really are partially about fun, but it's really more about how we learn and how we play with ideas and how we are played by the game so that we can restructure the way that we understand. So games are really important, not simply just as playthings, but as learning things. And in fact, when we study what happens in games, we're really to a large extent studying how we learn. How does learning happen? In addition, games are about the most motivating thing, I think, probably, well, you know, I mean, aside from chemicals, games are about as motivating as anything that we see in life. Kids will just play games endlessly, on and on and on, playing game after game after game. Why? They're incredibly motivated to play the game. So the study of games is also, to a large extent, the study of motivation. Of course, we can't get out of talking about addiction when we talk about games. Games are so motivating that sometimes we get dragged, drugged is probably the right word, we get dragged into the game and we end up in the game hour after hour after hour. What's that all about? The study of games can also help us understand what it is to become addicted and what's the nature of addiction. And of course, games are just about the definition of fun. When we're playing some sort of game, when we're playing some sort of rule-structured activity, not unlike boarding is or skiing is at a ski resort. It's a rule-structured activity that you can excel at and you can get better at. Now, of course, in sport type of games, there's also the idea of adrenaline, right? And adrenaline isn't exactly what we mean when we say motivation or addiction, but maybe there's a part for that to play as well. And finally, and from the standpoint of this class, I think what's really, really interesting about games is that they're what I might call friction-free information consumption. Friction-free meaning it's not a lot of drag, right? When you read an encyclopedia, there's a lot of drag. That's not friction-free. But when you learn through gaming, when you learn through participating in some sort of game, you don't feel the drag. You don't feel the effort. And so it's a very interesting thing for us to look at and think about in this class, the idea of friction-free information consumption, and along the way, lots and lots of learning. So let's move on now specifically to educational games. And we're going to talk to Matthew Gorgio on gamification. You can see his profile here. He's been doing educational games for a good long time.
I'm a founder, CEO, and chief experience designer at MediaSpark.
And what does MediaSpark do?
We're a software development company, and we focus specifically on educational games, simulations, and social networks.
Oh, great. And so tell us a little bit about your background. How did you come to the place you are now?
I was one of the original video gamers, you know, the first kids to have an Atari and then a VIC-20 and a Commodore 64. I ended up studying engineering and math in college, and just the opportunity came up to start a business, and I decided, you know, this is a good time to do it. So that was way back in 1994. Gamification is really the application of game mechanics to other things that aren't necessarily games. It could be to daily life. It could be how do you drive your car. It could be how you brush your teeth. It could be how you learn. You know, if you want to learn how to start a business and run a business, we believe the best way to do it is to actually go ahead and do it. But of course, that's not necessarily feasible in the real world, so we've simulated the running of a business. Everything from choosing your products and pricing your products and hiring employees by reading through resumes and negotiating salary offers with those employees and managing your finances and so on. So the ultimate goal of a simulation like that is to teach you how to successfully run a business. One of the real challenging issues in education, which is different than gaming, is what should those goals be? Because you're not necessarily shooting someone or chasing someone down some maze. You have to actually, in terms of education, ultimately, the ultimate objective in education is to change someone's behavior.
In traditional games, the goals are pretty easy because they're simple and they're set and they're kind of arbitrary with respect to life. But in life, goals are maybe a little bit more complicated, and trying to model them in the game is a little bit more complicated as well.
That's exactly right, and you have to be careful on the education side because you are influencing people's behavior, and so the goals cannot be arbitrary, like as you suggest. We have a couple of rules when we design. One is we don't like to use metaphors. So if we want to teach you about business, we're not going to put you in space and set you up like you're trading with space aliens and so on. That might be interesting and fun, but we believe it gets in the way of learning. Some people might suggest that it adds to cognitive overload because your brain now has to interpret the metaphor in addition to what you're actually trying to teach them. Other people have different opinions on that, I'm sure, but for us, we want to recreate and put you in that as realistic environment as possible. We're actually, even though we're basing the variables and the interrelation between variables on the real world, we're actually exaggerating and accelerating the consequences of the decisions you're making in the simulation so that you can learn better. And what I mean by that is, if a consequence is too nuanced, it's too subtle, you as a learner may not even notice that consequence. And if you don't notice the consequence, then you're not really learning, right? So we want to exaggerate consequences, and we also want to accelerate them so that you don't have to wait days, weeks, months, years for something to happen. We want it to happen within a matter of minutes or hours. So again, you get that opportunity to experience everything as quickly as possible, so you can learn from that and react from that. Right.
Now, one thing that what you're talking about reminds me of a little bit is the idea of Farmville. Right. In Farmville, you're supposed to be a farmer, and when you plant something, you don't have to wait till next spring for it to come up. It comes up immediately, and you get the idea of what it's like to be a farmer. You get immediate rewards for it, and that moves you forward, and you feel like, well, I feel like I've kind of done some farming after playing that. That's one side of the equation, but the other side of the equation is it's really a simplistic view of what it means to be a farmer, and they leave out 99.99% of the experience. How do you deal with that same sort of issue?
Yeah, and your analogy is definitely a good one. So as an example, let's take a lemonade stand simulation. You might only make 3 or 4 decisions: the price of your lemonade, how much inventory you're going to stock based on the weather and the expected traffic patterns that you're going to put through, and maybe the quality of your ingredients. 3 simple decisions, but it's actually very complex interrelated learning that's going on in those 3 decisions. You've got price and profitability, you've got forecasting, you've got inventory management, all happening in a very rudimentary simulation. So even though it could be used for very young kids, it actually can also be used by adults who just aren't ready for the next step. And once they understand the fundamentals, then you can move them on to something that's in greater detail, like negotiating salaries with actual employees and reviewing resumes and so on.
So at the base level of your simulation, where you somehow are saying, I understand the creation and running of a business so well that I can boil it down to some algorithm, and I can boil it down to some set of very simple principles that you should learn as well. So back to Farmville, they are modeling the fundamentals of agriculture without any of the nuance, but their contention is, actually, if you learn this stuff, you have learned something useful. You've learned what we consider to be the most essential parts of that activity, and now you're better at it than you would have been before.
Correct, and of course with a game like Farmville, they're not necessarily interested in teaching you about farming. They want you to have a fun experience, so they can sell ads or lead generation or whatever it may be. So their objective from a business perspective is very different than it might be from ours, trying to deliver a training experience.
I want to pause here from the comments of Matthew to show you this little video on gaming and grading. And I have to say, this video actually was brought to my attention like the first day of our class by one of our students. And if you're that student, thank you very much. If I remembered your name, I would say it right now. But come on up for your bump. If you never got a bump for that, I think I might have given you a bump. Anyway, this video really changed my mind dramatically about how grading should work. And so let's have a little look at the video, and then I'll talk about it a little bit afterwards.
Right now, we're using a grading system that is essentially demotivational and sets up a reinforcing feedback loop for failure. Today's students first walk into a classroom or approach new assignments thinking of themselves as having an A+, at least subconsciously, and from there, with every mistake, there's nowhere to go but down. We need to recontextualize grading. In games, we've learned that progress encourages progress, and the human desire for efficiency is a far stronger motivator than the fear of falling further from one's goal. To this end, if you simply make all assignments worth points, let's call them experience for a lark, have all students start at 0 XP, and always gain points as they go, continuously progressing towards clear and tangible levels, each with their own benefits. Each assignment and each test feels rewarding rather than disheartening. It's more fun to gain stuff than to lose it. Additionally, this methodology never leaves a student at a point where they feel like they should just give up. The best part is that you don't even have to change anything about the way you already grade the class to do this. You'd still have the same total number of possible points the class was worth, and you divide them in the same manner that we normally divvy up letter grades. All you're doing is counting upwards instead of down, and corresponding the letter grades to levels as you go.
So a very simple concept. Instead of counting down, count up. And there's no reason why we couldn't be doing that. I sort of do that in this class, but not so much as I could be. So as we go forward, you'll see this class turning into something, or as I go forward, you'll see this class turning into something where I count up much more than I count down.
You use the term game mechanics. Can you break that down for us and tell us like what the 3 or 4 or 5 major parts of game mechanics are?
Yeah, and I guess one would be having some type of goal that you have to take some action in order to achieve that goal in one way or another. The ability to understand whether you're actually making progress on that goal. The ability to make it fun, make it engaging. Maybe not always fun, but at least engaging, much more so than traditional methods that we've been accustomed to over the years. And then again, that ability to do authentic assessment and to analyze how well I'm doing and give me some real feedback on my progress. So how do we design motivation? Well, for a teacher, it's demonstrating ease of use, the ability to integrate this into the classroom very easily, the ability to monitor student performance and track student performance easily, the ability to actually achieve the learning outcomes that they're mandated to achieve as part of their job. That's our definition of motivation for the instructor. For the student, first is the fact that it is an interactive experience, a game or a simulation itself, and that's of course very different than what students generally do in the educational environment. So that in itself is motivating. The second reason is that we try to make it very personalized. Whenever something is personal to you and it feels like it's you making the decisions and the consequences of those decisions, it becomes much more engaging emotionally and other ways. So as an example, a lot of institutions like to use case studies to teach people about business, and that's okay, but you're really learning about somebody else's experience that might have happened years ago. It's not you. With a simulation or game, it's your business, it's your decisions, it's your consequences. So again, much more engaging. Another way is how we like to think of it as emotionally engaging, and that's because it uses just-in-time learning. So in traditional learning, you're taught a whole bunch of stuff just in case you might need it someday, and of course you get most of it by the time you need it. And often, and especially with younger kids, they don't see the relevance of what they're learning and how it applies in the real world. But with a game or simulation, they're thrown in the middle of the real world in a risk-free way, and they're experiencing problems. And when they're experiencing problems, they're again with personalized, as we said earlier, they're motivated to solve those problems. And I'll give you an example. In our business simulation, what often happens in a classroom is a student will hire the first employee that comes along. So they're not going to read resumes and so on. Right? That's too much work. And of course, they have problems with that employee. Doesn't show up for work, is late, sick, on whatever it may be. And then they're realizing that their friend next to them is doing really well because they took the time to hire a good employee. Well, now they realize they have a problem, and they want to solve that problem because it's affecting their performance in the game, so they'll now take the time to learn what they need to know about hiring the right person. So it's that just-in-time learning, it's that personal motivation to want to learn more because they have a problem that, again, they've emotionally engaged and personalized.
Right, really good.
And on top of that, of course, there's brain research to suggest that we remember things when we're emotionally stimulated in some way, highs and lows in our lives. And if you can create an experience that kind of generates those high successes and high failures, that kind of thing, you'll remember those experiences much more effectively.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's the more explicit ways of rewarding someone. You can give them badges and points. And that seems to be very common and popular today. In fact, some people disparagingly call it badgification and pointsification, where what ends up happening is that the learner focuses more on achieving the badges and the points as opposed to actually learning what it is they want to learn.
So it sounds like you don't like the badgification very much.
Well, we recognize the value of it if it's used properly, and so we do use it, but we use it in a very effective way in that we only reward badges when someone actually demonstrates specific performance, and a performance that that they can internalize and realize, okay, I earned that because I did this correctly, not because I just did something, but because I did something correctly. And we also have badges that are earned, and you can maintain them as long as you continue to do things correctly. So we try to use them in a much more effective way than I think often you see in these types of experiences.
Right. So if I understand correctly, you're saying if you get a badge but you didn't really deserve it, then that's not good because you just stayed around long enough or something like that. But if you get a badge because you demonstrated something that you really know, then it's a good badge.
That's right, from a learning objective perspective. From an entertainment perspective, you might want to keep throwing badges at people just to keep engaged. Although there are some, there are consequences to doing that too, and that the player doesn't feel that they've earned, and if the player doesn't feel as though they've earned it as much, they may not engage with the game. So a lot of these theories are still up in the air today in terms of how they work best, and some people are trying to analyze them individually. They're trying to analyze badges individually, points individually. I don't think you can really do that. I think it has to be analyzed collectively in the context of the experience that you're delivering. And but anyway, that's another aspect of it.
Okay. So these rewards they're motivating, and you talked about the kind of the little rewards of badges and points and that sort of thing. Are there other sort of little rewards that you show people along the way? And I know the big reward is going to be your assessment eventually, but what are some of the little ones?
Well, of course, if you're running a business, we try to measure and report on a number of important issues. So, of course, the most important one that people will focus on is money. Do you have money? Because if you don't have enough money, you're going to go bankrupt. And in our simulations, you do actually go bankrupt. That doesn't mean it was a bad learning experience because now you've learned something effective and maybe next time you'll be successful. So cash, of course, is the ultimate one in a business type simulation. But we also monitor things like employee satisfaction. Customer satisfaction, employee morale. So, are you treating your employees well? If they only want part-time work, are you overworking them or underworking them? Are you paying them well? Your customers, are you, stocking up in your inventory properly? Are you pricing your products correctly? We even actually in some of our simulations, track personal stress. We actually require that you go home away from your business, go home and spend time sleeping and time with your family. Otherwise, your stress levels go up and you get sick, and there's other consequences.
Right. So does that boil down to sort of a set of gauges, and you're in the red zone on stress, and so you need to do things to fix that?
Exactly. Yeah, so sometimes we'll show dials and gauges. Sometimes we'll show happy faces. Try to simplify the. This is called business intelligence these days in the corporate world. But it's been going on in gaming for decades.
Yeah. Okay. Really great. Really great. So the final stage or the final mechanics of the game that we were going to talk about is the idea of assessment. So tell us. So the final stage or the final mechanics of the game that we were going to talk about is the idea of assessment. So tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So, the great thing about assessment in a game or simulation is we can track, as designers, we can track everything that you do in that experience. And when we can track all that data, we can give you some real-time feedback on how well you're doing on every aspect of your business. So we have one business simulation, for example, and we have a rubric, kind of education speak, in terms of analyzing your performance in individual areas. And we can analyze how well you're doing on inventory management, how well you're doing on pricing, how well you're doing on marketing. We can break it down in a very granular way and give you some real authentic feedback on how you're doing and if you're improving, are you trending in the right direction, are you getting better, are you getting worse, and so on. And we call it authentic because unlike traditional evaluation, testing, where you're supposed to learn something and then you go take a multiple choice or true false test or whatever, you're really only evaluating your ability to take a test. You're not actually evaluating somebody's ability to change their performance and apply what they've learned. With a simulation, if we get you to run a business and you run a business successfully, you're paying your bills, you're making money, you're balancing your stress levels and so on, then you've actually demonstrated you can do these things. And it's in a way that you couldn't do before. So it's true, it's authentic, it's accurate, and accuracy is another important one because I have an article I'm writing and it argues that simulated experience is better than real-world experience. Now, when I say that, I think most people are going to be taken back by that and think, wait a second, how can how can something that's not real in terms of experience, because nothing is better than experience in most people's minds, how can a simulated experience be better than real world experience? Well, there's some great examples. One, of course, is if you're going to learn how to fly an airplane, how do you fly an airplane in poor weather?
Yeah.
How do you fly an airplane with mechanical problems? You can't experience that in the real world. In the case of running a business, how long would it take you to experience all the things you need to experience to feel confident in running that business? Would it take 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years? We can accelerate all those things and make them happen in a simulated environment. And very importantly, we can give you accurate feedback. An example, I run into a lot of business people, consult with a lot of people, and I'm astonished at how many people come to incorrect conclusions of how the world works because of some experience that they've encountered, right? So they might say as an entrepreneur, well, I raised my prices and all of a sudden my business dropped the next 3 days, so I realized that was a bad decision, so I changed them back. Well, maybe that wasn't a bad decision. Maybe the weather was a problem at that time.
Right.
Or maybe you didn't advertise or present the prices properly. There's so many variables in there that I don't think people are, the average person is trained very well to analytically look at something and determine the consequences and the causes of these things. And with simulation, because we control it, and presumably we know what we're doing, we hope, but of course that's always subjective too, but we can at least help the learner come to the correct conclusions about how the world works, as opposed to the anecdotal conclusions or qualitative conclusions that I think most people come to.
Right. And so what I just heard you say was that if you're going to be an expert, for example, at running a business, there's a whole world of experience, and you might be 90 years old before you experience that entire world. But in your simulation, you can see that whole world in microcosm and get through it before, in a month or a year or something like that of training.
Exactly.
And see all the see the big picture.
Let's review what Matthew said about game mechanics, the kinds of things that they need to build into their games to make them good. He mentioned that they need to build in goals, motivations, rewards, and assessment. The goals, and what he said mostly about the goals, was make them realish, make them close to the kinds of goals that people would have in real life in this sort of situation, and definitely always show people's progress against the goals, because that's what gets them to the goals. When they see that they're moving toward the goal, they're seeing they're moving away from the goal. In motivations, he talked about motivations for the teacher, motivations for the person who's going to buy his product, basically, and they're really the practical concerns of, does it fit into my curriculum? Is it going to take too much time to do? Are the goals inside the simulation the same goals in my class, et cetera, et cetera? Very practical concerns for the teacher, but for the students, what he says motivates the students to want to use it is that it's personalized. It's all about them. It's not a generalized thing like you might read in a textbook. It's all about them. It's direct. When they take an action, the system, the learning system, tells them exactly what the results are. It's emotionally engaging. You sort of suffer when you do something wrong, right? If you hire the wrong kind of person, they quit. And you can kind of sort of feel emotionally how you might feel in real life. And finally, it's just in time. When you need to learn something, it's because you need to do something right that moment. And so the information about what you need to do is right there at the moment you need it in order to do what you need to do. Okay, so that's the motivations. Rewards, there's little ones like badges and points. He makes the good point about those badges being or potentially being overused, and so they have to be used parsimoniously to make sure that they're always to make sure that they're being used in a way that doesn't kind of defeat the purpose, like it's too easy to get a badge. Key progress indicators, so showing specifics about what their behavior is, their progress against the goal, but also key progress indicators, like for example in his business game, how stressed out you are is a progress indicator, so you have to keep your indicator within certain levels, giving you sort of like a dashboard. And you can see from some of the pictures that I showed you of his application that it is very much like a dashboard. We talked about dashboards before, like UIs being dashboards, putting all the information in front of you that you need to know in order to make decisions. Actually, we didn't talk about that. We talked about it in back-end data, that when we do data warehousing, one of the things that we want to have is a dashboard. What's going on right now on my site? This is the same idea of a dashboard. What's going on right now in my learning? Okay, and then obviously the final reward is the grade, the final evaluation that you get on your progress. Did you make enough progress? And hopefully that is very apparent to both. I mean, it's not something that comes as a surprise at the end of the course like it is in many college classes, but instead you always know what's going on. Then the final thing he talked about was assessment, and that assessment is important to happen in real time, very close to the point at which you made a decision, you're assessed on it so that you see immediate impacts, and then the ability to go back and fix it and try to get a better assessment in real time. And then finally, he mentioned the idea of this full experience, and that's really part of the assessment as well, is that you're able to experience a lot of stuff. You're able to get years and years of experience in a small amount of time by focusing in on the big pieces and by getting feedback immediately about how you're doing against those very large goals as well as against the smaller progress indicators. All right, but let's take a break from gamification and watch something that I consider to be the coolest game ever. This game goes way beyond being just a game, and it actually allows you to do something that can't be done in any other way. This game allows you to harvest all the creative spatial pattern recognition of hundreds and thousands of people to solve scientific problems that couldn't be solved any other way, and it's a compelling game. People want to play it. They spend hour after hour. It's addictive. So what a cool game. Let's watch.
Oh, look at how far away it is. Yeah, pull it right up tight against that.
It's long been said that a family that plays together stays together. If that's true, the Reddicks are off to a good start.
Look at the A right there.
Though it looks like child's play, this Seattle area family is helping unravel one of the most perplexing questions facing biologists today.
Oh, whoa.
How proteins fold into intricate shapes.
So now shake and wiggle.
The Reddicks are among tens of thousands of volunteers worldwide playing a free online video game called Fold It, invented at the University of Washington.
Boy, is it moving.
But while the game was created by scientists, most players are anything but.
I would say less than half of them have any background whatsoever in biology. We don't. And I didn't even take high school biology.
With respect to demographics, I mean, we have grandmothers with just high school education spend huge amounts of time. We have 13-year-old kids doing really well at the game. The natural thing to do, and this is what people are very good at, is to basically say, okay, I'm going to open it a little bit. You can hear some of the bubbles popping. And now I'm going to try to push this thing in.
UW computer scientist Zoran Popovic says what the players do have in common is the propensity for spatial reasoning, something we're born with. It's a valuable skill in predicting proteins because proteins are made up of long chains of amino acids that fold into unique three-dimensional forms to carry out countless functions in the body.
And here you can basically see there's a competition of groups, who's the best person individually.
Popovic hopes his video game can attract and harness the skills of a variety of different people, including those with very little background in science.
If you ever looked at these biochemistry books, they're like this thick on average, right? So you cannot tell people, well, go read this book and then come play our game. You know, that's just a total non-starter.
Sheets together would be a good one.
So every new person plays about 20 to 30 levels that we have created specifically for the purpose of being pulled in and knowing absolutely nothing about molecules and proteins to the point where they can actually start going on to real puzzles.
Let it shake out.
Players are given tools to shake, wiggle, and tug at a protein structure to force it towards its most natural state.
Very good.
We've always believed, and we see it happening now, more so than ever, that educational games and simulations and social networks as part of that as well are really revolutionizing education. It's completely changing learning, how we consider learning, how we approach learning in all subjects, all cultures, all industries, all over the world. We believe this for over a decade now. We were doing it back when, you know, we couldn't even use the word game to describe what we did because when we went to educational circles, the word game was taboo. Today, we're seeing that, you know, game is a much more popular term, and people are warming up to the concept that, hey, you know, if it's done properly, this can be a very effective learning experience. So we believe it's really going to revolutionize and change everything. We believe, you know, there's going to be more change in the next 10 years of how we learn than there's been in the last 100 years in terms of how education is delivered. And we think it's all combining, you know, the three terms we use is experiential, social, and gamified. That's where we think learning is going. We think it's going towards being experiential through games, simulations, simulated role-playing, live role-playing. We think it's going to be social, where people are learning together in peer-to-peer relationships, mentoring relationships, in some cases competing against each other in some capacity. And we think it's going to be gamified, based, similar to what we've been describing, game mechanics being applied to the various aspects of learning. But we think it's changing everything at this point. And we're not going to recognize learning in 10 or 15, 20 years from now in terms of how it's been done for the past 100. Today we see education as something you do by going to a classroom for a certain number of hours or sitting at a computer for a certain number of hours or whatever it is. We think it's going to be part of your life. So you don't go and sit somewhere for hours. Instead, you sign up for some experience. Let's say it's a negotiation skills course. In the case of Go Venture World, it's to run a business. And you do it for months and potentially years while you're running your normal life. So on Friday night at the movie theater, you get a text message that says, hey, so-and-so wants to buy product from you. What do you want to do? And you have to decide in that moment, are you going to step away from the movie and actually respond to it and make a business decision at that point, or are you going to let it sit? But if you let it sit, maybe somebody else will scoop in and get the deal. But it's an experience that happens as part of your life. It's live role-playing, it's simulated role-playing. There'll be avatars, intelligent agents that will interact with you. There'll actually be human people who will actually play roles, like actors who will play roles. It'll all be integrated into the technologies that we use today, whether it's your computer, your mobile device, your tablet, the telephone, and so on.
So after going through all this material on gamification, I think you have a valid case for asking me the question, well, how come you're not asked that way? And the answer is no reason. And as I move forward in this class, I will continue to do a lot more of these things. I'm learning as well, but frankly, in the very first version of this class, it was enough just to get all the material together and to get all the content together and to at least do a few things that are unusual and experimental. But as the class moves forward, I will certainly be incorporating these concepts, specifically the idea of leveling. I love that idea that you move from the level of a learner to the level of a producer, and then maybe the top level is a teacher, and that you get rewards. Of course, we give the bumps kind of rewards, but recognition, class status, other sorts of rewards, more candy, right? All those things are rewards along the way to help you learn. And right now, maybe the rewards are a little bit more haphazard than they are tied to specific actions that I want you to do. And so as I move forward in the class, I will make those rewards closer and closer tied to very particular actions that I think are the right actions for you to take. I'll establish this idea of levels, and I'll establish also the idea of just in time as much as I can. So I imagine, in some distant future that the classroom is a virtual classroom, literally a virtual classroom that you climb into online. You consume information as you need it in order to get to particular goals. You always have a dashboard. You always have a readout of where you are towards the major goals of the class as well as towards the minor goals. You have level, and as you progress through levels, you get certain rewards for good activities. Right? That's all stuff that's in the pipeline and is just a matter of time and effort before this class actually works that way. And then finally, the social network. There's a little bit of social network going on in this class, but nothing near the amount of interaction and joint effort that you could be having, and also being able to group up for fun with other people in the class. So as we move forward in this class, or not in this particular class, but as I move forward in doing this class over and over and over again, you'll see that it will migrate in that direction as sure as I can be about anything. So if you have suggestions, if you have ideas, come on and talk to me about it. I'm always happy to listen, and there may just be a bump in it because it's good behavior.